Japan has one of the highest murder solve rates in the world. So when a case stays unsolved here, something usually went very wrong. A killer murdered an entire family in Tokyo and stayed inside the house for hours. A group poisoned candy across Japan and made fun of police for over a year. A man walked into a bank pretending to help people. 12 people died. Nobody knows who he was. Some of these places or locations I actually visited living here in Japan. This is Japan's Unsolved Mystery Iceberg, and we're going all the way to the bottom. We're starting at the surface. These are cases most people in Japan have at least heard about, and somehow they are already terrifying. First, the Setagaya Family Murders. Then, a group known as the Monster with 21 Faces. Let's start with the case that many people consider Japan's most famous unsolved murder. An entire family murdered and still no arrest.
Like the video.
This case happened in Setagaya, Tokyo. And honestly, this one hits differently for me because I actually live in Setagaya. When you walk around here today, it feels completely normal. Families walking the dogs, kids going to school, quiet neighborhoods. Nothing about it feels like the setting of one of Japan's most famous unsolved murders. But on December 30th, 2000, an entire family was killed inside their own home. A father, a mother, an 8-year-old daughter, and a 6-year-old son. Police believe the killer entered through a small bathroom window on the second floor. The youngest child was attacked first. Then the killer moved through the house and murdered the rest of the family. But that's not what made this case famous. What happened afterward is what nobody can explain. The killer stayed 4 hours. He ate food from the family's refrigerator. He used their computer. He used their bathroom. He changed clothes. And then he simply left. The craziest part is that he left behind an unbelievable amount of evidence. Fingerprints, DNA, blood, clothing, personal items. Even the shoes he wore. Normally, that would be enough to solve a case quickly. But somehow, 25 years later, nobody knows who he is. Police have suggested the killer may not have been fully Japanese. Some of the DNA evidence pointed investigators in unusual directions, but nothing ever led to an arrest. Every year, police still hand out flyers near the area. Every year, people talk about the case again. And every year, the answers stay the same. Nobody knows who killed the Miyazawa family. Now let's move from a killer who left so much evidence to criminals who seem to enjoy being chased. Imagine opening the news tomorrow and hearing that someone had poisoned candy across Japan. That's basically what happened in the 1980s. It started with a kidnapping. The president of a major snack company was taken from his own home by masked men. The kidnappers demanded a huge ransom. But then something strange happened. The victim escaped by himself. Most criminals would disappear after that. These guys didn't. Instead, they started a nationwide campaign of chaos. They threatened food companies. They sent letters to the media. They claimed they had poisoned products. And worst of all, some poisoned products were actually found in stores. Parents panicked. Stores removed products from shelves. Companies lost huge amounts of money. Meanwhile, the criminals seemed to be having fun. They constantly mocked police. They sent letters making fun of investigators. At one point, they basically challenged officers to catch them if they could. The media gave them a name, the Monster with 21 Faces. One suspect became famous after being seen near a ransom drop. People called him the Fox-Eyed Man. His face was printed all over Japan, but nobody ever identified him. Over 1 million hours were spent investigating the case. Tens of thousands of leads were checked. Nothing worked. Then one day, the letters stopped. The group announced they were done. Not because police were getting close, not because they got caught. According to them, they were simply bored. And just like that, they disappeared. Nobody knows who they were. Now we're leaving the surface. The next cases aren't just unsolved. They're confusing. Investigators found victims, evidence, possible suspects, but somehow the answers never came. Next, the Hachioji supermarket murders and the Inokashira park dismemberment case. 3 women, 1 story, 1 night. And almost 30 years later, nobody knows why it happened.
Subscribe.
3 women were working late at a supermarket in Tokyo. One was 47 years old. The other 2 were teenagers. They were looking forward to meeting friends and enjoying a local festival after work. None of them made it home. Sometime during the evening, somebody entered the building. The 3 women were taken upstairs. They were tied up. Then each was shot in the head, execution style. The killer left. At first, investigators thought it was a robbery. But there was a problem. The store's safe still contained millions of yen. Nothing important had been stolen. If robbery was the goal, it failed completely. So why kill 3 people? Police searched for years. No witnesses. No useful surveillance footage. No clear motive. Eventually, investigators looked into possible gang connections. Years later, a man connected to organized crime was brought back to Japan from Canada after another suspect mentioned his name. People thought the mystery might finally be solved. It wasn't. There was no evidence linking him to the murders. No changes were filed, and the case returned to where it started. 3 victims, no answers. What makes this one especially sad is how ordinary the victims were. 2 teenagers making plans after work. A woman rebuilding her life, a normal evening, and then everything changed. The next case happened in one of Tokyo's most beautiful parks, and is probably the most disturbing crime scene on this entire iceberg. If you ever been to Inokashira Park, you probably remember the cherry blossoms, or the swan boats, or maybe the Ghibli Museum nearby. Most people don't think about the murder when they think about the park. But one morning in 1994, a cleaner opened a trash bag and found a human body part. Police quickly checked other trash cans. The situation got worse, much worse. Pieces of a man's body had been shred through the park. The victim had been cut into dozens of sections. Investigators noticed something disturbing. The cuts were extremely precise. This wasn't somebody panicking after a murder. Whoever did this appeared to know exactly what they were doing. The victim was eventually identified as a local architect. He lived nearby. He wasn't known as a criminal. He wasn't known for having enemies. Friends described him as quiet and ordinary. So why was he killed? Nobody knows. Witnesses reported seeing suspicious people carrying bags during the night. Others reported strange activity nearby. None of it led anywhere. Some investigators suspected organized crime. Others believed multiple people may have been involved, but no theory was ever proven. The case eventually reached its legal deadline. No arrests, no confession, no explanation. To this day, nobody knows why that architect died, and nobody knows who left him in the park. Now we're getting into the cases that makes people question the official story. Cases where some people believe the truth was missed, or maybe ignored. Next, the Teigin Bank Poisoning, and one of Japan's biggest historical mysteries, the Shimoyama Incident. Imagine a man walking into a bank. No gun, no mask, no threats, and somehow leaving behind 12 bodies.
Like the video.
Imagine somebody walked into a bank today, told everyone there was a health emergency, handed out medicine, and 12 people died. It sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what happened. Tokyo, January 1948. The bank had already closed for the day. 16 people were still inside. Employees, office workers, a maintenance worker, and his family. Then a man walked in. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't force his way inside. Instead, he claimed to be a health official. He told everyone there had been an outbreak of a disease in the area. As a safety measure, everyone needed to take medicine. Nobody questioned him. Why would they? He looked official. He sounded official. And he seemed completely calm. The workers lined up. The man handed out pills. Then he handed out a liquid. To prove it was safe, he even pretended to drink some himself. One by one, everyone followed his instructions. Then people started collapsing. Within minutes, the bank turned into a nightmare. Some victims died where they sat. Others tried to run. Some made it only a few steps before collapsing. 12 people died. 4 survived. The killer calmly took money from the bank and walked away. And that's where the mystery begins. Police eventually arrested a famous painter named Sadamichi Hirasawa. After weeks of interrogation, he confessed, but almost immediately he took the confession back. And a lot of people believed him, because there was one huge problem: the poison. Experts later argued that the substance used in the attacks wasn't something an ordinary person would have easy access to. Some research began looking at Japan's wartime chemical and biological research programs. Others suggested former military scientists could have been involved. Then things got even stranger. The two surviving witnesses who actually saw the killer weren't fully convinced the painter was the man they saw. Over the years, doubts kept growing. Retrial requests were filed again and again. They were all rejected. But something unusual happened. Even though Hirasawa had been sentenced to death, multiple justice ministers refused to sign his execution order. That's extremely rare, almost unheard of. It's as if people inside the government weren't fully convinced either. Hirasawa died in prison decades later, still claiming he was innocent, and the man who walked into the bank pretending to save lives has never been identified. The deeper you look into this case, the less it feels like a robbery, and the more it feels like something bigger. Something people didn't want investigated too closely. The next case isn't just unsolved. Even today, people can agree on what crime actually happened. This case happened only a year after the Teigin poisoning. And just like Teigin, the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Sadanori Shimoyama was one of the most important people in Japan's railway system. At the time, Japan was still rebuilding after World War II. Pressure was everywhere. And Shimoyama had just approved a decision that made him extremely unpopular. 37,000 railway workers were losing their jobs. Imagine being the man who signs the document. Thousands of angry workers, massive political pressure, constant criticism. Then suddenly he disappears. On the morning of July 5th, 1949, he leaves for work. At some point, he enters a department store. Witnesses see him wandering around. He appears distracted, confused, almost like something is wrong. Then he vanishes. The next day, his body is discovered on the train tracks. At first glance, it looks simple. A stressed executive takes his own life. Case closed. Except not everyone agreed. Not even the investigators. Some believed he was alive when the train hit him. Others believed he had already been killed somewhere else and placed on the tracks afterward. The experts couldn't agree. The police couldn't agree. The prosecutors couldn't agree. Nobody could agree. And because the evidence was damaged by the weather, many answers were lost forever. Soon, theories exploded. Maybe angry workers killed him. Maybe political extremists killed him. Maybe somebody wanted to send a message. Maybe he really did take his own life. Every theory has problems. And more than 70 years later, nobody knows which one is correct. What makes this case fascinating is that every explanation sounds plausible, and every explanation sounds incomplete. We are now entering the part of the iceberg that makes people angry, because the next cases might have been solved if investigators hadn't gone down the wrong path. Next, the Ashikaga case, and the kidnapping that changed Japanese policing forever. This case may have put the wrong man behind bars for 17 years and let the real killer walk free.
サブスクライブ
Out of every case on this iceberg, this one might be the most frustrating because somebody paid the price, just not the right person. In 1990, a 4-year-old girl disappeared. Her body was found the next day. The crime shocked the country. Police needed answers, and before long they found a suspect, a local man named Toshikazu Sugaya. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't known for violence. But investigators focused on him anyway. Then came the interrogation. Hour after hour, pressure, accusations, demands for a confession. Eventually, he broke. He confessed. And that confession changed his life forever. Police announced they had solved the case. The public moved on. Sugaya went to prison. But there was one problem. The evidence wasn't nearly as strong as people believed. At the time, DNA testing was still new. Most people treated it like magic. If DNA said someone was guilty, that was the end of the discussion. Years later, better technology became available. The old evidence was tested again. The results were devastating. The DNA didn't match Sugaya, not even close. The man who spent 17 years in prison was innocent. 17 years. Think about that. Imagine being arrested at 45, then walking free at 62. Almost 2 decades gone. But that's only half of the story. Investigative journalists noticed something disturbing. There were several similar child murders in the same region. Same age group, similar locations, similar methods. What if they were connected? What if there had been a serial killer? If that's true, then while an innocent man sat in prison, the real killer remained free. And because so much time passed, some legal deadlines eventually expired, meaning the person responsible may never face justice, not because investigators lacked evidence, but because they focused on the wrong person. Most people outside Japan have never heard of this case, but it changed how kidnappings are investigated to this day. Most people outside Japan have never heard of this case, but it changed Japanese policing forever. It began with a 4-year-old boy named Yoshinobu. One day he left to play nearby. A completely normal day. Then he disappeared. At first, people hoped he was simply lost. Then the ransom demands arrived. Someone had kidnapped him. Police launched a huge operation. The entire country followed the story. This was exactly the kind of crime everyone fears. A child taken. A desperate family waiting for answers. Eventually, a ransom exchange was arranged. Police prepared carefully. Officers were deployed. The suspect appeared. Everything was in place. And somehow, the kidnapper got away. The public couldn't believe it. The entire operation had failed. The person responsible slipped through the police net and vanished. For years, the mystery remained unsolved. Then, investigators finally identified a suspect, a former watchmaker named Tamotsu Obara. During questioning, he admitted what happened. The boy had been murdered. The heartbreaking part is that by the time the truth emerged, years had already passed. There was no rescue, no happy ending, only answers. And even those came too late. But this tragedy had a lasting effect. Japanese police realized they needed a completely different approach to kidnappings. New specialist units were created, rapid response teams, dedicated investigators, new tactics. Many of the systems still used today trace their roots back to this case. So while most unsolved mysteries leave behind only questions, this one left behind something else, a permanent change in how Japan responds when a child disappears. We're getting close to the bottom now. The next cases are less famous, but in some ways they're even darker. One involves a murder that may have crossed international lines. The other involves dozens of victims. A promising young woman disappeared after agreeing to meet someone, and one missing letter may hold the answer.
Like the video.
In 1959, being chosen as an international flight attendant was a huge achievement in Japan. Only a handful of women were selected. One of them was 27-year-old Tomoko Takekawa. She had recently returned from training in London. She was about to start flying international routes. By all accounts, her future looked bright. Then she disappeared. On March 8, she attended church. She visited family. Everything seemed normal. Later that afternoon, she told people she was going to meet someone. That was the last time she was seen alive. 2 days later, her body was discovered near a river in Tokyo. Almost immediately, investigators became interested in one particular person, a Catholic priest she knew through church. Police believed he may have arranged a meeting with her shortly before her death. And that is where the mystery begins. Because while investigators were suspicious, suspicion isn't enough. They needed evidence. And they never found enough. The priest agreed to questioning. Lawyers were involved. Church officials became involved. The case quickly became far more complicated than a normal murder investigation. As time passed, the trail grew colder. The priest eventually left Japan. He lived the rest of his life overseas. Some writers later claimed he was the killer. Others argued there was never enough proof. Even today, opinions are divided. But one detail continues to bother investigators: a letter. Tomoko was reportedly carrying a letter on the day she disappeared. Investigators believed it may have helped explain where she was going and who she planned to meet. That letter was never recovered, and with it may have disappeared the best chance of solving the case. The next story doesn't feel like a murder case. It feels like a national tragedy. This case is different from the others. Most stories on this iceberg involve one victim or one family. This one involves dozens, maybe more. To understand it, you have to imagine Japan right after World War II. The country was devastated. Food was scarce. Housing was scarce. Jobs were scarce. Many families could barely survive. For some parents, raising a child simply wasn't possible. A maternity home in Tokyo offered a solution. Parents could leave unwanted infants in their care. At first glance, it sounds humane, a safe place for children, a second chance. But that wasn't what was happening. In early 1948, police made a shocking discovery. Several infant bodies were found connected to the facility. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something horrifying. Many infants left at home had simply been neglected. No proper care, no proper support, no effort to keep them alive. The number of deaths remains debated. Some estimates place the number above 100. Think about that for a second. More than 100 infants may have died. Yet when people discuss Japan's most infamous killers, this case is rarely mentioned, partly because the public viewed it differently. Many people blamed the terrible social conditions at the time. Others blamed the parents. Others blamed the people running the facility. In reality, all of those factors probably played a role. The legal outcome shocked many observers. Given the number of deaths, the punishment was surprisingly light. The case eventually faded from public memory, but it helped push major changes in Japanese law. Changes that affected reproductive rights and family planning for decades. It's one of those stories that feels less like a crime and more like a national tragedy. We've reached the bottom of the iceberg. The final two cases aren't just mysteries. They're questions that may never been answered. One may involve a serial killer. The other one is one of the strangest stories in modern Japanese history. Imagine a killer operating for nearly 2 decades without being identified. That's what some people believe happened here.
サブスクライブ
This might be the most terrifying case on this entire iceberg, because there may never have been just one victim. Between the late 1970s and mid-1990s, several young girls disappeared across the North Kanto region. Different towns, different years, different investigations. At first, nobody connected them. Police treated each murder as a separate case. But over time, journalists and independent researchers noticed patterns. The victims were similar ages, the locations were similar, the circumstances were similar, and the bodies were often discovered near rivers. The more people looked at the cases, the more they started asking the same question. What if all those murders were committed by the same person? If that's true, then Japan may have had a serial killer operating for nearly 2 decades, and nobody realized it. Or worse, maybe they realized it too late. This is where the Ashikaga case becomes important, because while the police were focused on an innocent man, valuable years were slipping away. Years that could have been spent finding a real killer. Years during which more children may have been at risk. We'll probably never know. By the time mistakes were corrected, legal deadlines had already expired on some of the cases. The trail had gone cold. Witness memories had faded. Evidence had aged. If there really was a serial killer behind these crimes, he may have died peacefully without ever being identified. And that possibility is what makes the story so disturbing. Not that the killer escaped, but that investigators may never even know who he was. And finally, we end with a case that sounds impossible, but the more you look into it, the harder it becomes to completely dismiss. We've reached the bottom of the iceberg, and instead of ending with a murder, we're ending with something much stranger. In 1975, 2 boys were heading home in Yamanashi Prefecture when they noticed something unusual in the sky. At first, they thought it was some kind of aircraft. Then one of the objects appeared to descend toward a nearby vineyard. Curious, they went to investigate. What happened next turned an ordinary afternoon in one of Japan's most famous UFO stories. The boys claimed they found a strange object on the ground. Then they claimed they saw a creature. Now normally, that would be the end of the story. Kids have active imaginations. Case closed. Except the adults got involved. Teachers visited the site. Local newspapers investigated. And according to reports, they found things they couldn't immediately explain. There were marks on the ground, damaged posts, reports of unusual lights in the sky from other witnesses. Even radiation readings became part of the story. That doesn't prove aliens visited Japan, not even close, but it does make the case harder to dismiss than most UFO sightings. Over the years, believers and skeptics have argued endlessly about what happened. Some think it was a misunderstanding. Some think it was a hoax. Others think something generally unusual occurred that night. Personally, I don't think we'll ever know. But that's exactly why it belongs at the bottom of the iceberg. Because unlike many UFO stories, this one refuses to disappear. Nearly 50 years later, people are still visiting the area, still debating what those boys actually saw, and maybe that's a real mystery. Not whether aliens landed in Japan, but why nobody had been able to fully explain the story after all this time. Japan is one of the safest countries in the world, that's true. But every country has things buried beneath the surface. Some of these cases might still be solved. DNA technology keeps improving. New evidence still appears. Witnesses still come forward. But some of these mysteries are probably reaching the point where the truth may never be known. The people involved are getting older. Evidence disappears. Memories fade. And all that's left are questions. Maybe that's what makes these stories so fascinating. Not the crimes themselves, but the fact that after all these years, we're still searching for the answers. And somewhere out there, someone probably knows exactly what happened. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also support me on my Patreon. Thank you for watching. Bye.